Welcome to Secret Story. Dear friends, thank you very much for watching. Leave comments, put likes, share with friends and subscribe to the channel. We'd only been married 2 years and I thought we were happy, planning a future together, talking about having kids, maybe getting a dog, the whole 9 yards. Then I got a text. My wife had left me for her boss. And it was over. In the middle of a pandemic she'd walked out on me, deciding she'd rather go into lockdown with her asshole boss instead of me, angry, hurt, and so confused, I didn't know what I should be feeling. Tina was my whole world, and now she was somewhere her boss, and we were done. I know our life had been great. At least I thought. She'd never complained to me. Though I would hardly call her adventurous, and I always took care of her and I'd never once left her hanging, but I had a feeling that scumbag she worked for was probably teaching her a few new tricks. Clenching my fists, resisting the urge to do some serious damage, I got up, went in the kitchen and got another beer. I twisted off the cap, took a long pull, wandered back into the living room, and stared at the TV, not really giving a shit what was on. This sucked. And the worst of it was I never saw it coming. I'd always thought we were good, happy, even that I was half out of it, with about a dozen empties lined up on the coffee table in front of me. Zoned out on my couch, blindly staring at a stupid infomercial about some do-it-all wonder tool, when I thought I heard a knock at the door. No idea what time it was, only that it was late. I dragged my staggered over to see who it was, figuring everyone else should be in lockdown, too. Then I rolled my eyes when through the peephole, I spied my mother-in-law Sadie standing on my front porch. Just what I needed, a visit from Tina's mom, who I knew would want a play-by-play of what happened. After I unlocked the door she strode in, shaking her head and muttering, "Oh, Scott, I came as soon as I heard." When Tina called her sister and told her what she'd done, "I had to come and see if you were okay. That girl of mine has always been a little flighty, but I never thought she'd do anything this crazy, walking out and leaving you for that boss of hers, especially now with what's going on out there." I don't know what she was thinking. Watching her pace around the room, clad in a leopard print wraparound dress, it also had me thinking back to the night I first met her, when I'd had a similar reaction. It was New Year's Eve, 4 years ago, when I'd had my first encounter with Sadie. Tina warned me that her mother really knew how to party and let loose, and did she ever. When we walked into her house around 8 o'clock that night, it was wild. I remember sucking in a breath when I got my first look at Sadie. Because, she looked amazing. So amazing, I could hardly believe she was my girlfriend, Tina's mother. Tina told me her mom had married in her teens and had both her daughters before she was 20, and divorced her cheating father soon after. So I knew she had to be only about 45 now, though she didn't look more than 35. By that point of the night, but I still remember that once the crowd started the New Year's countdown, that she'd shocked the hell out of me when everyone cheered at midnight. I honestly thought as the clock struck 12, she might give me a peck on the cheek. She winked and said, "Just so you know, Scott, if Tina ever kicks you out of home, you come and see me. And I'll be happy to take care of you." Thinking back to how she seemed that night, and now that my wife had actually left me for another man, I wondered if Sadie remembered telling me what she'd do if Tina ever dumped me. She said, "Don't you worry, big guy. Sadie's here now, and she'll take care of you." To be honest, that's kind of what I was afraid of. Tina had been pretty predictable, never much into trick shit, Sadie not so much. So I didn't know what she had in mind for me. When she looked over and noticed the empties on the table, she shook her head, and said, "You poor thing. Trying to drown your sorrows, huh?" But when I tried to shrug, and mutter, "Yeah, maybe," I nearly fell over. So Sadie, struggling to hold me upright, said, "I think a good night's sleep will have you feeling a lot better in the morning." I staggered along beside her, with her struggling to keep me on my feet. My legs felt like rubber, I just felt so wasted. Then I lay there blinking up at the ceiling. Next thing I knew she was busy. "Oh, my. What do we have here?" she asked, grinning slyly. "If she wants a peek at my deal, why the hell not?" I figured it wasn't like Tina would care, with her go with boss. Still, it did feel a little weird to have Sadie eyeing my. Then holy shit, I could hardly believe it. "Silly Tina," she said, walking away from a good man like you. You know. I always liked you, Scott, and I know you were good to her, too. You're a good-looking guy, nice and tall. And, ooh. I looked down to see why she stopped talking and holy, I couldn't believe my eyes, and I decided to just let her have her fun. I forgot all about my wife walking out on me, and leaving me alone in the middle of a pandemic, especially when all I could think about was how insanely good my mother-in-law she actually had me wondering why we'd never done this before. But I imagined this wasn't something she could have offered to do for my birthday, at least without raising a few eyebrows, especially my wife's, now that I was forced to work from home, if Sadie had nowhere else to be. I decided this would be a perfect way to get through the crisis. Then my mouth fell open as I watched my wife's mother. What an amazing deal this was turning out to be. I was also starting to feel a little more clear-headed. All I knew was this was something I'd never forget, Sadie coming to my rescue and giving me just what I needed when she'd found me at my worst. Now, instead of feeling sorry for myself, all thoughts of my wife Tina fled. Right now nothing else mattered, and that was all I needed to hear happily smiling into my eyes, and asked, feeling any better? I just laughed at the absurdity of the whole thing and hugged her tight to show how happy I was that she'd shown up to take care of me. The only way she knew how. Sadie might not be the type to bring over a casserole to prove that she cared. I was not about to complain. Just when my wife had left me feeling at my lowest, wondering what I'd do without her, I was so grateful to have a mother-in-law like Sadie who'd strutted her into my world to rescue me. And I mean literally till Sadie had breezed in and decided to take care of me. I'd been dreading the lockdown, not even sure I could cope with handling it on my own. But I had a feeling if she was game, we'd never be bored, spent and breathless. And soon we were out cold. It just felt so good that I knew I'd never slept better. In the morning when I woke up, I was happy to discover that it wasn't just a dream and it really happened in Sadie. Judging from the way she was smiling over her shoulder at me, it looked like she was ready for another day of fun. When we finally got out, she made us cheese omelets for breakfast that we shared at the kitchen table. Again, but over the next few weeks, even with Sadie staying with me, we still took care of what we had to. Working for the town, I did a lot of meetings online and got all my work done, while Sadie taught her fitness classes the same way. So, we both managed to work our jobs from home. But once we were done for the day, we'd both start smiling, which had me almost forgetting about the fact we were in lockdown. Funny how life turns out sometimes, the way it can deal you a hand you never expected. And all your plans seem to fall apart. But I was starting to feel that what I had with Sadie I'd heard when the going gets tough that families stick together. So, the way I looked at it, we were just doing our part to keep it in the family. And whenever this pandemic thing ended, I had the feeling we'd still be together, and hopefully for a long time to come. Because when you've got a mother-in-law and willing and as sweet as Sadie, you sure as hell don't take her for granted and you do your best to keep her just as happy as she keeps you. Tina called one day and hinted that she'd like to talk about getting back together. Seems it didn't work out with her boss. But I just told her I was happy in my new life and she might want to look into being faithful with the next guy she married. Because Sadie and I have something that might be hard for other people to understand, but lately it's feeling more like a real-life romance that hopefully over time might end up blossoming into something even more. TOB continued, copyright 2024 all rights reserved. No part of this story can be reproduced in any form or by any electronic or mechanical means without written permission from the author. All characters are fictitious, and any similarity to actual people, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental unless otherwise stated. Dear friends, thank you very much for watching. Leave comments, put likes, share with friends and subscribe to the channel. Story 2. Welcome to Secret Story. This is a true story from about 25 years ago and the couple I refer to are still very good friends of ours. For the story I shall refer to them as John and Julie. John was my best friend and a work colleague, and Julie was and still is his wife. We were all in our mid-30s and living in a small town in rural Suffolk when Julie propositioned me at a party that I had known and worked with John for a number of years when he met, fell in love with and married the gorgeous Julie. My wife and I spent nearly every weekend with John and Julie either partying or eating out and drinking lots, and generally having a great time. John and Julie had been married a few years when this took place. We were at a party when Julie asked if we could have a chat outside. I mentioned to my wife that Julie wanted to talk in private, and this made us both worry that something may be wrong with their marriage. John now was as drunk as a skunk and crashed out on a sofa, so it was easy to slip outside with Julie. Julie said, "I have made a serious error and need to borrow some money without John knowing. Would you be in a position to help me?" I said, "Talk me through what has happened, as I don't want to offend John." Julie said, "Don't ask me to explain, please. I will do anything if you could just help me." I had been drinking, otherwise I would probably not have said what I said. Julie said, "Okay, I am desperate. So, if that's what it takes, I will do that, as long as you can lend me some money." I was stunned by her response, as I was only joking. Julie said, "I need the money real soon. John will be away on a stag weekend next week, so let us arrange a date to suit both of us." I was pretty sure it was all just drink talking. I was going to lend Julie the money whatever happened. That I went back and told my wife everything. Well, almost. I forgot to mention the bit about being offered. My wife agreed we should let Julie have the money if it was going to help save her marriage. We agreed on an evening when my wife went to Zumba classes. When I arrived at Julie's house, it was all in darkness, so I instinctively assumed she had pulled out of our deal. I knocked gently and she answered immediately, as if she was waiting behind the door. That I was invited in, and noticed she had candles lit everywhere instead of electric lighting to somehow set a sensual mood. Once the door was closed, Julie wrapped her arms around me and gave me a big full-on kiss on the lips, and said, "Thanks for coming." I could now see that Julie was dressed in a big white fluffy dressing gown, which came just above the knee. She also had what appeared to be white nylons on her legs, and fluffy slippers. Julie wore more makeup than she would normally when we went out as a group, and looked stunning. She ushered me through to the lounge, where she had a bottle of wine and 2 glasses waiting on the table. It was clear she had already had a glass or 2 herself from her demeanor, and I could smell it on her breath. We sat down and I handed her an envelope that contained the money she had requested to borrow. Julie thanked me. Julie poured us a glass of wine each, and we toasted each other as we each took a long sip of the Pinot Grigio wine. As we put our glasses down, Julie stood up and took me by the hand. I instinctively followed as she led me through the house and up to the master bedroom. Once in the bedroom, Julie said, "Okay, I will be back in a minute or 2. I need not have worried. As Julie re-entered the bedroom, she also wore a really high pair of white strappy stilettos. These made her legs look even more fabulous than normal. Julie was an angel in disguise. "How do I look?" said Julie. I stuttered a reply and said, "Fantastic." "Well, you look uncomfortable," said Julie. Julie said, "Wow. Bigger than I expected." Julie said, "I am going to enjoy this." She looked at me and said, "I kept my part of our deal. How was that for you?" I was totally spent and just said, "That was wonderful." Julie said, "Meet me here again tomorrow night for a repeat, then we are even and no one needs to know." I just said, "Okay." To be continued. After spending an amazing evening with Julie in repayment of a monetary loan, I went back as invited for a second round. In the first part, I described how I jokingly told the lovely Julie I would lend her money. Much to my surprise, Julie agreed, delivered, and on top of that invited me back for seconds. I visited Julie for the second time with my wife, believing I was heading for the gym. I go daily, so it was not unusual for me to go out at this time. I arrived at Julie's house in shorts, a t-shirt, and flip-flops, having parked my car a street away so as not to give the neighbors anything to discuss. It was dark when I arrived, so I hoped I was not spotted, but as a regular visitor to the house, it would not be unusual to see me around. Julie opened the door and quickly ushered me in. Julie was hidden by the door, so all I saw was her face and head. My jaw nearly hit the floor when I saw her fully as she closed the door and switched on the lights. Julie looked at me and said, "You obviously like what you see then." Julie led me up to the master bedroom, which was decked out with candles and soft lighting. I took the lead from here. Julie seemed completely spent and in ecstasy. Julie sat up and said, "Okay, it's your turn." Julie did not stop for a second. Julie and I had a few minutes lying together before I went off to the bathroom to shower. I had never used the ensuite in Julie's house and was amazed at the size of the wet room and what an amazing shower setup she had. I had been in the shower for a few minutes when I heard the bathroom door open and close. I continued to wash and clean myself when I felt a pair of hands wrap around me from behind. I looked down and was surprised to see that these did not look like Julie's hands. They seemed much smaller. That I spun around and was amazed to see Lisha, Julie's much younger sister. Lisha is 10 years younger and at least 6 inches shorter than Julie. I said, "What the hell are you doing in here?" Lisha said, "Julie told me all about you and I wanted a bit of the action." Lisha said, "Julie said you knew how to use it. I needed to find out, so I have been staying with Julie and watching you." I didn't know if this was a trap or what was going on until Julie appeared at the door. She stood watching and said, "Enjoy." When she had finished, she thanked me and left. I finished showering and got dressed. I met both of the girls in the kitchen drinking wine and had a few minutes with them before I had to leave. That I said to Julie, "Perhaps you will explain to me later what that was all about. And if you miss a payment. This, they both agreed to. As I was leaving, Lisha handed me a piece of paper with her phone number on it and a message reading, "In need of a call me anytime." There is to be a part 3. When I met Lisha, I finally managed to make the call to Lisha. It was 3 weeks after she handed me the note with the intriguing message written thereon, "In need of a call me anytime." Lisha answered her phone quickly. It was almost as though she was expecting me to call right then. That I said, "Hi, were you serious?" "Corny, I know." Lisha replied, "Oh yes, when and where can we meet?" "I have been expecting your call. How come you have taken so long to call me?" I said, "I was never quite sure you were serious." Lisha replied, "I have never been more serious in my life." I said, "Okay, I will get back to you as soon as possible. I need to check out my wife's movements over the next few days. Then we can meet up." Lisha said, "Can I come to the gym with you? You can show me what to do." Over dinner later that night I told my wife that Julie's sister Lisha wanted to join my gym, and had asked if I could introduce her and show her the ropes. That my wife said, "What a great idea. You will have some company. And perhaps you will stop bugging me to go with you." Wow, that was easy, I thought. Now to arrange a date. I made the call to Lisha the following day, and we arranged a date. I felt like a teenager all over again, excited, but nervous, about what could go wrong. I picked Lisha up from her house at the agreed time and we headed for the gym. We had a great workout and became very hot and sweaty. Lisha was amazing, I could hardly keep my hands off her. I knew other members would be watching us as she was the new hot babe on the scene. At the end of the session, we both showered, changed, and met up in the now very quiet reception as the gym was about to close. We left the gym and climbed into my car. The car park was almost deserted, and we kissed for the first time. "Wow! You're huge!" she gasped. I said, "Can you take it all?" I started the car up with Lisha lying in my lap. I drove out of the car park and drove towards her house. I knew there was no way I could last. We arrived at her house minutes later. Lisha climbed out of the car, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "Same time tomorrow." Then she was gone. We trained together several times after that, and I was lucky enough to get each time. Sadly, Lisha met her now husband soon after. He was jealous of our relationship and stopped her training with me. We lost touch sadly as the years ticked by, until I saw Lisha at Julie and John's house more recently. We then spoke about how naughty we were and agreed to our story being published. As I left John's house, Lisha forced a piece of paper into my hand. I read it later and found it contained her mobile phone number and a note. The note reads, "Call me if you want another." I was curious. We were both much older, and both in long-term relationships. Lisha still looked hot, but I had put on some weight and was not as fit as I was back then. I sent Lisha a text message, "If you are serious, meet me at my office." I gave her the address, after 6 any evening, as I would be alone. Later that week, after all the other staff had gone home and I had locked the doors, there was a knock on the door. I checked the cameras and could see it was Lisha standing outside looking incredibly hot. I quickly ushered her inside, hoping no one from the neighboring business premises had seen her arrive. Lisha looked great in a simple, very short denim mini skirt, white vest top, and stiletto sandals. "I thought we could hang out for a bit," she said as she had a good look around. "I guess we are alone. No one to disturb us." she said. Yes, we are the staff all left an hour ago, I said. With a big smile on my face, Lisha walked towards me as I sat perched on the edge of my desk. Picked her up, and spun her around so she was now the one sitting on my desk. Wow, you are still very strong, she said. Lisha slipped her hands down. Wow, twice my husband. Can you still handle it? I said. Let's find out, she said. Lisha collapsed forward on the desk, exhausted and very sweaty. I thought it was just in books, Lisha said. Can we do it again sometime? Perhaps somewhere more comfortable. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved. No part of this story can be reproduced in any form or by any electronic or mechanical means without written permission from the author. All characters are fictitious, and any similarity to actual people, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental unless otherwise stated. Dear friends, thank you very much for watching. Leave comments, put likes, share with friends and subscribe to the channel. Story 3, Welcome to Secret Story. Trisha was in her mid-40s. A mother of 2, and had been married for 20 years. She stood 5 feet 6 inches tall and had a slender build of about 120 pounds. Like many of the other soccer moms in her well-to-do neighborhood, she was involved in her kids' activities, kept a nice house, and didn't really do anything out of the ordinary other than getting tipsy with the ladies at the monthly book club meeting. With her kids being older and able to drive on their own, Trisha's days began to change. She no longer needed to ferry the kids to after-school activities as they could now do this on their own. Her husband's job required extensive traveling, so Trisha was alone quite often. Daily life began to drag on, and after a while of boredom, Trisha decided to go back to work. Her family did not need the money as her husband had a high-paying executive job, but Trisha needed something to give herself purpose. She eventually found a job which allowed her to use her college degrees that had been mothballed during the past decade and a half as she was raising the kids, online teaching. This allowed her to stay at home but have something to do during the day to keep her mind stimulated. As part of her onboarding process with the university where she would be teaching, Trisha was required to attend in-person training with her academic department head Heather. This training was out of state and would take an entire workweek. Fly out on Sunday night, classes all week, and then fly home on Friday. While Trisha's husband traveled around the country quite a bit for work, Trisha had never taken any solo trips since the kids had been born. On the week of her trip, she arranged for her husband to be at home with the kids. As the big day arrived, Trisha hugged her kids, kissed her husband with a peck on the lips, and headed to the airport. Florida would be nice in the spring and Trisha was looking forward to her first trip away from home in quite some time. Trisha arrived in Florida, picked up a rental car, and drove to the hotel. While checking in, she spied a pair of men at the hotel bar who were eyeing her. Raising a family for the past 18 years left Trisha with little time for herself. So seeing members of the opposite sex take interest in her was quite exhilarating. The next morning, Trisha drove to the university and met her new boss, Heather. Heather was a cute redhead a few years younger than Trisha, in her late 30s. After some requisite paperwork, Heather reviewed department policy with Trisha and the two ended the day with discussions on class curriculum for the upcoming semester. The next few days were filled with long and tedious teaching workshops at the hotel where Trisha was staying. Since the workshops were running all day long and partly into the evening, Heather had booked a room for a few nights at the hotel so she would not have to drive across the city to get back home. On Wednesday night, Heather told Trisha that the two of them needed a night out to blow off some steam from the arduous work of the past few days. Conveniently enough, the hotel had a great bar and the two decided that it was safer to drink where they were sleeping. No risk of DUIs if they did not have to drive. As Trisha and Heather walked into the bar, they noticed a pair of well-dressed men sitting across the room having cocktails. Trisha remembered that these were the men who were ogling her a few nights ago. Heather and Trisha sat at their own booth and ate a light dinner. During their meal, a waitress dropped off 2 drinks and noted that they were compliments of the gentleman across the way. Heather and Trisha looked across the room and raised their glasses in thanks to the guys. A brief time later, Heather needed to use the restroom which was near the table of their gentlemen callers. After answering nature's call, Heather returned to the table with Tom and Stuart in tow. It was obvious that the men were on a business trip as they were both in suits, ties loosened after a long workday. Tom was a solid 6 feet tall with an athletic build and looked to be in his late 30s. Stuart was a bit shorter at about 5 feet 10 inches and had a slight middle-aged pudge, but nothing too excessive. For a guy who was in his early to mid-40s, he was still in decent shape. Tom instantly seemed interested in Heather and sat by her side, leaving Stuart to chat with Tricia. After thanking them for the drinks, the four exchanged pleasantries and the idle chatter of people getting to know one another. All were having an enjoyable time and the drinks flowed. After a while of this, Heather was getting tired and told Tom that she was going to head back to her room. Tom, of course, was dying to go upstairs with Heather and slyly asked if she needed an escort back to her room. Heather knew what Tom was up to, and although she was slightly curious to see what would happen if they went to her room together, she thought of her family and politely declined his offer. Heather slid to the other side of the table and told Tricia that she was headed upstairs. Knowing that Stuart wanted to take Tricia back to his room just as Tom subtly proposed to her a few seconds ago, she asked if Tricia wanted to end her night as well. Tricia was having fun, genuinely enjoying her conversation with Stuart, and told Heather that she was going to stay. A bit worried, Heather asked Tricia if she was sure, and Tricia told her that everything was fine and that she would head upstairs soon. Tricia said, "Just one more drink." Heather replied, "Okay, please be careful and text me if you need anything." With that being said, Heather said goodbye to the table and took her leave. Tom was a bit disappointed as he watched Heather exit the hotel bar. Would he have another date with his hand jacking a load in an empty hotel bed as so often happened on his business trips? Likely, he thought, and then turned around to join Stuart and Tricia back at the table. Tricia was laughing at one of Stuart's stories and the two looked like they were having a great time. Truth be told, Tricia was having a great time. Having been married to her husband for 20+ years, she had heard her husband's stories 100 times over, and every other conversation they had lately revolved around his job. It was nice to have a stimulating conversation with someone new and with a person who seemed genuinely interested in her. Noticing that the drinks on the table were getting low, Tom headed to the bar and ordered another round for the group. After handing Stuart his drink, Tom sat next to Tricia and spilled a bit of his drink onto the table. Everyone at the table had a good laugh and Tricia grabbed a napkin to clean up the mess. Having wiped up the spilled liquor, Tricia plopped back down in her seat and raised her glass to toast the group. That one drink Tricia intended to stay for turned into many as the group continued to chat the night away. Tricia was feeling quite tipsy, and this was honestly the most fun she had enjoyed in quite some time. Tricia never made a habit of trying to attract the opposite sex since she had been happily married for 2 decades, so the night's experience was a bit new for her. Having drained yet another bourbon, Stuart announced that he needed to visit the little boy's room and hopped up from the table, leaving Tricia with Tom. When Stuart returned from the bathroom, the lights in the bar suddenly flashed a few times and the bartender announced that it was closing time. The trio stood, and upon doing so, Tricia stumbled slightly. With Tom and Stuart on each side of Tricia, they both quickly grabbed her to prevent her from falling to the ground. Slightly embarrassed but too drunk to care, Tricia thanked the boys for coming to her aid and regained her footing. The three walked side by side to the elevator with Tom and Stuart holding Tricia by her arms to give her support. While mindless chatter was occurring outwardly, Tricia's mind was swimming. Her drunken state had smashed the walls of her inhibitions and certain thoughts began to race through her mind. She was drunk. She was alone in a city far away from home. These things did not happen to a good suburban mom like Tricia, but it was now. Could she do it? Tricia had been married for so long and had remained faithful during that time. Tricia decided to see where things would go if she let it happen. "I am doing this," thought Tricia. She wanted to be one of the girls in the hentai comics she read. The ring of the elevator bell snapped her back to reality, and as the doors opened, they stepped into the hall and advanced towards her hotel room. At this point, Tricia knew what she wanted and put her plan in motion. As they took the final steps towards her hotel door, Trisha purposely tripped so the guys would have to catch her again. Noting that she may have had a bit too much to drink, she handed Stuart her hotel door card and asked the two men if they could help her into the room. Tom and Stuart exchanged hopeful glances and thoughts of lust raced through their minds. The hotel room door opened and the three of them entered. Upon reaching the bed, Trisha lazily dropped herself onto its surface and asked if someone could help remove her shoes. Tom grabbed one foot while Stuart grabbed the other. Trisha lifted her legs so the guys could have better access to unstrap her shoes. Holy shit! Thought Stuart. Trisha's mind was racing. Hentai images flooded Trisha's brain just this one time, she told herself. No one will ever know. Trisha told her that she needed to wash up in the bathroom. Trisha shut the door to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror, hair disheveled. Holy shit, she thought. What just happened? I don't even do that for my husband. Do I allow this to continue? It did feel good though, so good. And Trisha felt powerful, she thought to herself, I have command of these men. Okay, just this once and never again. No one will ever know. With her mind set while Trisha was in the bathroom, Stuart and Tom looked at one another and huge smiles spontaneously spread across their faces. Dude! Did that just happen? Said Stuart. The guys high-fived one another and could not believe their good fortune. Just then, the bathroom door opened, and Trisha exited in a white robe. Trisha looked at Stuart and Tom and said, "Give me your phones." The two men exchanged inquisitive looks, but quickly complied with Trisha's request. Trisha opened a dresser drawer and inserted the phones. I don't want any videos making their way to the internet, so these phones are going to stay in this drawer, said Trisha. The two men didn't care about anything, quickly agreed. After closing the drawer, it all begins. Trisha finally looked like one of the girls in her hentai comics. Unbeknownst to Trisha, she had left her phone on the nightstand and Stuart used it to record the last few minutes of this. This action had left Tom spent and he quickly fell asleep. Trisha told Stuart that she was going to take a shower. She washed herself and began to reflect on what had just happened. After cleaning herself, Trisha exited the bathroom. She looked at the clock and it was 5 a.m. With both men fast asleep, Trisha quietly packed her belongings and left the room. The last day of her training was being held at the university, so she could slip away undetected. Trisha enjoyed the night. A few hours later, Trisha ran into Heather, who asked her how the night ended. Trisha replied, "Oh, nothing too exciting. We had one last drink and then went to bed." Little did Heather know that Trisha did not go to bed alone that night. Trisha finished the last day of training with Heather and then headed home to Texas. While she was waiting for her plane at the airport, Trisha was scrolling through her phone, and she saw the video that Stuart had taken. What the is this? Luckily, Trisha was wearing her headphones so no one could hear coming from her phone. She quickly covered her phone and sneaked away to a part of the gate where there were no people. She pulled up the video again. She knew that she had put their phones in the dresser drawer before, but she had forgotten about her own phone. She was 99% sure that she did not see the guys open the drawer that night, so she hoped the video on her phone was the only evidence of that night. Before watching the video, Trisha nearly hit the trash button to delete it forever. Something, however, compelled her to hit the play button instead. Before doing so, Trisha checked her surroundings to make sure no one was looking. She could not believe the woman in the video was her. Her finger hovered over the delete button once again, but she reconsidered and simply closed the video. When she got home, Trisha greeted her family. The kids gave her a quick hug as they rushed back out the door to be with their friends. Her husband asked how her trip went. Trisha replied, "How exciting can an onboarding session be? It was boring, but I managed." Physically spent, her husband said, "You should take trips more often if this is how it will be when you get home." Trisha smiled and said, "Don't worry, work will definitely require me to take more of these trips." With that, she collapsed on. She could not wait for her next trip out of town. To be continued.